Hey, this is Kari. Thank you for taking the time to watch this short video. Today I want to talk about downward dog. Downward dog is a pose that we take so frequently in yoga. I think it's important to, one, know what it is, but two, have at least one way in our back pocket that we might be able to modify it or change it, just depending on what our body is like and how we're feeling that day. So today I'm going to go over the mechanics of downward dog, how to take downward dog, and one way that you can change downward dog to either switch up your practice or just to try something new, especially if downward dog doesn't work for you. First, let's talk about hands in downward dog. When you're taking downward dog, it's important to leave enough space between your hands. One of the things I see frequently in downward dog is people trying to bring their hands too close together. Consider that where you place your hands also gives space for your shoulders. Personally, I like to take more space on the mat when it comes to where I place my hands. So when I place my hands on the mat, I tend to put my forefinger and my thumb on the mat and have my other three fingers coming off of the mat. That just makes it really comfortable for my shoulders to make sure there's plenty of space. But no matter what, you want to at least keep a shoulder width space between your hands. Another thing you want to consider is spreading your fingers. When you spread your fingers wide, you just create a wider base to support your whole body on your hands. So fingers spread wide, and then also notice where you're putting your forefinger. Your forefinger should point forward. It can also point a little bit outward, but do avoid the forefingers coming in and making an internal rotation of the hands. That just puts a little bit extra pressure on your shoulders. Rather than having your shoulders come in, you want more space between your shoulders and your shoulder blades getting broader. So by placing your fingers on the mat with your forefingers either facing forward or your forefingers slightly rotating out, that's going to give a better experience in your shoulders. Next, let's talk about your feet. Feet, just like hands, you want to make sure there's enough space for your hips. Oftentimes, I see people taking really narrow stances with their feet in downward dog. So see what it's like to take your feet at least hip width, and again, maybe even wider. Sometimes I like to take my feet closer to the edges of the mat. So you can be at play with the space between your hands and your feet. Also consider the space between your hands and your feet going front to back. It's not necessary for your feet and your heels to completely touch the floor in downward dog. It's perfectly acceptable to have your heels slightly lifted up off the floor. More importantly, find a softness in your knees. When you have a softness in your knees, you create more access to your hips, being able to lift up high into the sky. When taking downward dog, consider that we're looking to lengthen the body. We want to create length from the tailbone through the crown of the head, and then from the tailbone all the way through our legs. So you're creating a V shape in your body. Let's see how it looks. I'll have my hands with my forefingers facing forward and my three fingers coming off the mat. Tuck the toes underneath the heels, and then press your tailbone to the sky. And just walk around, swim around in your downward dog a little bit. Notice that I've got my feet pretty wide. My heels are not touching the mat, and there's a softness in my knees. And by softening the knees, I create more access to my pelvis. I'm able to lift my tailbone further into the sky. It's not really possible for me to stretch my heels down without creating a strain in my calves. So I prefer to keep a nice softness in my knees. Same thing with my elbows. I create a really gentle softness in my elbows, which allows me to pull the shoulder blades into the spine. And this creates a much more firm, stable downward dog. If I bring my hands too close together, then I just feel really unstable here. I feel like I could topple over. But with more space between my hands, I really feel like a big gust of wind can come through and I would still stay still on my mat. Notice the way the crown of my head is reaching down towards the floor, and you could see a straight line from my tailbone through the crown of my head, and then from my tailbone down to my heels. And this feels really good. I could stay in this downward dog for quite a while. One alternative pose to downward facing dog is puppy dog pose. In puppy dog pose, we're continuing to keep the length in the spine, but we'll keep the knees on the mat. In puppy dog pose, You can walk your hands forward, and if it's comfortable, place your forehead on the floor. But notice the way my hips are stacked over my knees. This is different from child's pose, where my booty is closer to my heels. In puppy dog pose, my hips are lifted and stacked over my knees, and the forehead could either be on the floor or you can have it slightly above. You can even put a block underneath your forehead. But either way, there's length in my spine. I'm creating a long line of energy between my hips and my head, and I'm getting a nice stretch in my back. The one thing you don't get in puppy dog pose is the back of the legs getting a nice stretch. But if your wrists hurt or your arms hurt or you just don't want to have that much pressure with your head pointing down, puppy dog pose is a nice alternative to downward facing dog. I hope you found this video useful. If you have any more questions about downward facing dog, please feel free to put your questions in the comments and I will always get back to you in those comments. If you're interested in learning more about yoga, consider taking a class with me. In the description of this video, you'll see a link where you can sign up for your first class for free. I hope you enjoyed, and please like and subscribe if you want more materials from me. I release new content every week.